Welcome back to AM Northwest. Our first guest has spent decades protecting the California redwoods, and his new book tells the story of the defiant fight to preserve the treasured trees. We welcome the author of The Ghost Forest, Racists, Radicals, and Real Estate in the California Redwoods, Greg King. Good to have you with us, Greg.
Oh, so good to be here. Thank you.
I had no idea redwood was so coveted. Why?
Yes, a lot of people, and myself included before I got deep into the research, believed that redwood was used mostly for homes.
Right.
And it certainly was. But redwood became an essential ingredient, an essential product for industry. And it undergirded industries in ways that no others could. For instance, the most important use of redwood was for transporting water. And that was, of course, to cities and farms, but also for power production, electric, which powered all the other industries. Redwood was impervious to rot, and no other wood could be stitched across miles of terrain and get water from, say, the Sierra streams to industries and to cities and to agriculture, 50, 60 miles away. Redwood could do that. And so it was a highly coveted resource.
And why your interest in preserving it? Why was it important to you? Because you have generations of your family involved.
Yes, my family got to Sonoma County in 1873, and they owned one of the largest redwood timber mills at the time. And I grew up understanding the lore of the great redwood forests of the Russian River in Sonoma County, where I'm from. But nobody in our family, going back to my grandfather, who was born there in 1903, had seen the great redwoods. Flash forward to 1985, and there were still great redwoods, the ancient giant trees that we know of, that when we think of redwoods, in the north, in Humboldt and Del Norte counties, but they were almost all gone. And in that year, I was working as a reporter and learned about a takeover by a Houston company called Maxam that took over the Pacific Lumber Company in Humboldt County that owned the last large private trove of ancient redwoods, and they were going to cut them all down to pay off junk bonds.
Wow.
And so that got me into the story as a reporter, and I just became so immersed that I quit my job and I took it on as an activist to try to save the trees.
You really did a lot with the Save the Redwoods League.
Yes.
And tell me about that, because it does sound like it's a great organization trying to save the redwoods.
Yes, I actually dealt with Save the Redwoods League in the 1980s and 90s to try to save what we called Headwaters Forest, which I actually discovered and named in 1987. So this is the last large ancient redwood grove, 3,000 acres, standing outside of parks. And I believed at the time, because they were so useless in saving this last grove, that Save the Redwoods had its glory years in the 1920s and 30s, protected all these lands for parks, and then just became kind of weak and ineffectual. But through my research, principally through the League's own archives at Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley, I learned that the League had been founded and run by California industrialists starting in 1919 is when they really took over. They founded 1918, but they really took it over and ran it in 1919.
We're looking at a picture where President Reagan is with the League.
Yes, that was Newton Drury in the middle, Newton B. Drury, who was the executive secretary, today we'd call him executive director, of Save the Redwoods League for many, many years, and was kind of the J. Edgar Hoover of Save the Redwoods League. He really controlled redwood preservation, along with the board of directors, who were all industrialists and pro-redwood logging. In fact, there's a great character in the book by the name of Wigington Creed, who, wonderful pulp fiction name, right? He was a very powerful early 20th century attorney, corporate attorney, who was not only the world's largest purveyor of redwood. He owned redwood mills and lumber yards and redwood lands. He brokered redwood lands. He became president of PG&E, which was the world's single largest consumer of redwood stave pipes to move all that water to their turbines. And he was a founding director of Save the Redwoods League, and he wrote the League's Articles of Incorporation and bylaws. So I point to Wigington Creed, and in the book several other very important early industrialists who ran the League, as the smoking gun for this. It's not really even a theory, it's sort of irrefutable in the book about about a third of the book is dedicated to unmasking Save the Redwoods League as a product of industry, a creation of industry. Today, what we call greenwashing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, making it sound more environmentally friendly.
Absolutely,
right?
yes. They had a patina of being what we would call eco-groovy today.
Right, yeah.
You know, and they wanted to preserve roadside strips of ancient redwoods because in 1918 the California State Highway to Humboldt County was completed, and that allowed everyone who wanted to drive up, to motor up and look at the redwoods whenever and wherever they wanted. And people were starting to understand that these redwoods were being decimated. And so the League's idea was to create what is now called Avenue of the Giants, which is just a strip of redwoods to hide the logging behind the beauty strip. And they were very good at this, and timber companies sold cutover lands and brush lands and some incredible ancient redwood groves for about double the value, small groves along the road, and that was the idea. And only because of the Depression, because the market fell out of the redwood and everything, you know, completely, redwood orders dropped by 500% in 1 year, starting in 1928 to 1929. And so there was a buyer's market. And so Save the Redwoods League was able to create the big parks we know of today, mostly in Humboldt and Del Norte counties, and they're relatively small. They're actually not big, but they paid exorbitant amounts and bailed out the timber companies with taxpayer money during the Depression, and prevented, for instance, Save Pacific Lumber Company from folding. And that was the company I was dealing with in the 80s. Pacific Lumber was highly overinvested at the time of the crash and would have declared bankruptcy, but they were awarded with quite a lot of money, $3.2 million, which is about $400 million today, for land that was worth quite a bit less than that at Bull Creek.
We barely scratched the surface of this. The book again is titled The Ghost Forest, Racist Radicals and Real Estate in the California Redwoods. Greg King, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure.
You bet. We'll be right back with more AM Northwest.